Hi, everybody. Welcome back. I hope you're able to make some new connections and dive deeper onto some of the important topics that we're dealing with here today. Before we go to our next panel, we would like to recognize and thank one of our awesome innovations leader sponsors, AARP. And in that mind, we are going to I ask you to join me in welcoming to the floor Mondla Moyo from AARP Livable Communities team, who's going to introduce the next panel, The Road to Connections. Road to Reconnections. Sorry about that.
Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to sort of make sure I said thank you on behalf of the team at AARP Livable Communities for the work that you all are doing. And yes, as you can tell, my head is actually that size. So I appreciate that picture. Part of the task, part of my task today is to sort of obviously introduce the next speaker panel, but also sort of share the why for AARP. Calvin talked a lot about North Stars, and one of our tenets is around sort of what we do for all. And so the Equity Summit represents that work for us, championing the vision of our founder, Dr. Ethel Persa-Andrus, and so that's why we are part of this work. But today, that also means that we are telling the story, and one of the sort of key pieces that we did was our work around Before the Highways that profiled 6 communities that were divided by infrastructure when the highway and the interstate projects started to be built out in this country. And then we took that further and started funding Reconnect Communities projects through our AARP Livable Communities Challenge Grant Program. And so we are really, truly trying to put our vision and, more importantly, our voice and our finances and money towards changing not only the infrastructure, but the livability of communities across the country that our state offices are working in to make sure that they fit the build for all the communities, for all the people that are represented there. And the big reason why is that, like the internet, Father Time is undefeated, and so we're all getting older. And so what are you all doing and what are we doing to make sure that those communities can not only be a thriving place for older adults, but can be a place that people see themselves reflected in the infrastructure and the housing and the pedestrian safety and all the pieces that make up a community. So on behalf of myself and the rest of the team at the AARP Livable Communities team, I want to say thank you for coming out to the Equity Summit. I have the pleasure of introducing, I'm going to say friend. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say my good friend, Beth Osborne. She is the vice president of Transportation America, and she has a really amazing panel for us. So can you all give her a round of applause, please?
Yeah. I get to work with Mondla on so many fun projects, and so he's stuck with me for some time. I'm going to pull Christopher Coase up to the stage with me. Christopher, who we're going to sit down over here. Yeah, here and here. Christopher, I first met before I came back to SGA in 2014. I think we first met in about 2010. And it might have been right before you came to SGA. So we've been kind of circling around each other. We've gotten to work together for a bunch of years, too. Christopher ran the Locust Developers team at SGA, and then left us to go be Assistant Secretary for Transportation Policy at the U.S. Department of Transportation, and then Undersecretary for a while. And one of the big projects he worked on while there was the Reconnecting Communities program. It was something that we talked about before he went over there, something that we wanted to see the transportation program focus on, is undoing the damage that the highway program had caused. And so he went and did it. And now we're going to take a little time to talk about your experience and what you learned, and then we're going to pull 2 folks from communities who are in the midst of Reconnecting Communities projects now to hear from them. So Christopher, I just want to start in a high level. You oversaw 3 rounds of the Reconnecting Communities pilot program and the Neighborhood Access and Equity program, but you actually put out 5 years of funding. Very, very cleverly done. I appreciate that move. And I want to know, what did you learn? What came out of basically it's the money's been on the street for about 3 years. What's come out of that? What have you learned?
Well, first, hello, Smart Growth America Equity Summit. Yes. Kudos to the entire leadership, obviously with Calvin, but you, Beth, and so many others. I remember this was just an idea on the piece of paper, and for seeing this not just on Zooms, but now having it in person. And also, even though equity might be a 4-letter word in some corridors, equity is still the North Star that many of us have to aspire to, because that is how we build a better America. So kudos to the Smart Growth America team. So, Beth, when you asked the question, there's a lot of coffees and a lot of wine and a lot of, coffee and wine, as me and my colleagues try to think about, like, what the heck happened. Wait, is there anyone in press in here? Please note yourself any press. Okay, Chatham House rules. Okay, and you asked the question of, like, what did we accomplish? What happened? I think the first thing I would say is that when I remember when I was actually with T4 America on the consultant side, there were a lot of these, like, little seeds, right? You have folks in Baltimore who are talking about, like, the damage that was being done on the west side. You have folks in Rondo neighborhood in Minneapolis talking about the damage that was happening with I-94 there. You had conversations in places like Atlanta, where I'm from, Southwest Georgia. And it's interesting enough, there was this all conversation like, when will the federal government and federal transportation policy recognize these voices? And now, not only 4 years later, but 4 years plus 2.5 months, some days and some hours, some change, what I think I've learned, and I think the nation has learned, is that you can't ignore these voices. You can't ignore these voices. And one of the things that gives me actually hope is that the way that the Reconnecting Communities program, as well as the neighborhood access and equity program, what was revealing was that actually this wasn't about Baltimore or Minneapolis or Atlanta or Miami, which many of these cities were the face of. This was small town USA. This was suburbia. And it actually fundamentally showed to the country that the way we do transportation is actually broken. And that bell is now going to be unrung. So that's the first thing. The second thing we've learned is, I had to make sure I got the numbers right. There are just give me a backstory. When we initially proposed the Reconnecting Communities program, in the American Jobs Plan.
$20 billion.
$20 billion.
Yeah, I remember.
And I remember two colleagues actually at FHWA literally say to me, plus one White House official, are there really $20 billion of reconnecting projects? And luckily for me, having worked with Smart Growth America for almost a dozen plus years, you've been on the ground and there's more than $20 billion. And just to give you guys kind of a understanding of the pipeline, we had over 1,500 applications, totaling $15 billion in ask. And as Beth mentioned before, while it was a, quote, 5-year bill plus the 1 year of money, we operated in less than 2.5 years. So imagine if we kept going. We would have been far succeeding $20 billion. But then, of course, with that, we were only able to fund 257 projects, of which we were able to get $4 billion. And one of the things that we learned there, and this is the part where going from $20 billion to $500 million to then $1 billion to then having people being mad to going to then $4 billion, what we learned now is that $20 billion was not enough. That we had to look at how the programs actually is designed. So thinking about all the formula program, right? How do we look at the larger pie? Because again, $20 billion to take down a highway, turns out that could be like 3 projects. But where is the housing money going to come from? Where's the equitable economic development money? And we realized we do not have enough. And so because of that, one of the things that we realized at the department is that Reconnecting Communities as a program couldn't be a program. It had to be a principle. And so we literally worked with agencies like HUD, EDA, USDA to say, hey, come in, look at our applications now. Because we may only have, in the first round, we had $185 million, even though we had over $2 billion of ask. We need your agencies to come on board and piggyback, leveraging your resources. And that actually, to me, fundamentally raised a bigger question. Why isn't the federal government working better across all of its agencies to truly reconnect communities? Because while we focused on DOT, HUD had a level, because a lot of the red line policies came out of their shop, right? USDA had a lot of challenges on their rural loan programs in terms of denying commercial and housing. And so in many ways, it was an opening of like, we need to make Reconnecting federal agency, understanding that they own this too. The last thing I'll say in terms of reconnecting is that I am excited and feel highly confident that reconnecting will survive. I was totally, not shocked, but I was surprised that when Secretary Pete Buttigieg would go and testify before Congress and people would talk about their projects, I would have a member from Syracuse, at that time was a Republican member, who was saying, please don't forget about us. Let's get that money to that project. And it was interesting because like, why would this member speak up? It was because we didn't realize that there were so many allies for the type of lifestyle, the type of quality of life in all this. Chamber of Commerce was coming out of the woodwork. You wouldn't say some of these business leaders were equity, leaders. No, but they wanted the same thing. They wanted good quality of life. They wanted a thriving community. And reconnecting was their roadway, their train track to get there. And I think that's a part where this program, I truly believe if we leverage that, we can actually see not only this program continue to grow and expand, but actually make the principles of it actually be something that the federal government at large can take on.
So there's a lot that you've just mentioned. Some things that may not be obvious, but are really important. You have created pipelines of projects. There are many projects that people are now talking about that they weren't even talking about when the program was created because they hadn't been given the space, the permission, or the funding to start those conversations. That's huge. And you've got folks internally to the federal government talking amongst agencies, also important. And maybe some folks that didn't think they loved reconnecting communities, then heard from constituents and decided maybe they do. These are great things.
I will say there were equally amount of people who said, I don't want to do that.
But we are seeing, even with the Reconnecting Communities Institute, that there are dozens of communities that were engaged in that, and folks really wanted to get the technical assistance that was going to be offered, and that program is going to go forward under the Trump administration. So, you've planted some seeds that are going to grow. One thing I didn't hear you mention is any particular project that you're proud of. Is there something that was funded that you're seeing move forward that you're excited about from the first several rounds?
Oh, Bev. Being responsible for the department's discretionary grant programs and then saying which of your projects are your favorite.
I don't know anything about that, but ask me what my favorite from the first 5 rounds of Tiger is, and I can come up with my top 3.
Okay, so
I'll give you 3.
I have a couple. So first, I think it goes without saying, the largest award that we made through the Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods program was to Portland, Oregon, to the I-5 corridor, the Albany Vision Project. And what made this particular project, anyone from Portland? Show of hands. Okay, a few folks. Let me talk about that application for a second. One of the things I love about this process was that a lot of the awardees that we picked and selected were awardees who were working for a decade plus. So one of the things the lesson here is learn is even if you're just starting out today, it's okay. Your window will come. Right? The second thing that made that project, which we awarded at $450 million. Okay, out of $4 billion, we gave it 450. We made a big bet here. And why? Because it was one of the rare projects where not only did they have the right story to talk about the devastation that I-5 created, the devastation, both from wealth creation and alike, but it was actually one of the most profound and innovative and actually forward-thinking solutions that was actually owned by the grandchildren and the nieces and the nephews of those impacted. That the Albina Vision Trust was created by by the residents and their children, who now have been for a decade advocating to the city and the state to actually buy back that neighborhood, block by block. And the key aspect is that they wanted to cap the I-5. Now, again, I know there's a lot of debate about capping, but this, for their vision, they wanted to cap so they could have a control of 100 acres where they could bring new economic opportunity, new businesses, new affordable housing that they can control. And in addition to that, this was before we even came in, they had convinced philanthropy to come in and co-invest. And so for us, the 450 was not just a down payment, but hopefully for us as an accelerant of that's what it really takes to do Reconnecting Communities projects well, of actually having community ownership and actually getting buy-in from the state and the locality, recognizing, here's the thing, they asked for $1 billion with state DOT, with ODOT. We only gave them 450. But here's the thing, not only did they come up with the rest, because that was a huge fight too, because they did come back for a mega grant, but we also knew, we said, hey, we're giving you $450 million to do the cap. The state said they needed $1 billion to do all other stuff. We said we're only giving you the money for the cap. If you want to do a highway expansion, you got to fight that out yourselves. It turns out they were able to find a way to close the gap, not to build the highway expansion, but actually do the cap. Because when it came down to the benefit cost analysis, it actually made more sense to invest in the community revitalization. So that was my number one project. The second one, I would say that was more or less of not a project at the end, but it was actually an acknowledgement. We recognize, and this is something that you and I have talked about a lot, when you're at the federal level and you get these amazing applications, it's really hard to say no to really great projects, right? But let me tell you what's really hard. When you actually have to look at a project and realize the community has 3 separate visions. And while it's not a project that I'm excited to fund, but I'm actually proud that we said no. And that was in New Orleans.
Oh.
In the Claiborne Express.
So I'm a New Orleans native, and I cannot back this enough.
When you literally had a state that was basically had a kind of like a beautification aspect, you had a community group, actually 2 community groups had 2 different visions, with all the pressure of like, this is the poster child for us to like withstand that political pressure, actually saying, no, actually, this is not the way to go. You guys need more homework. You actually need to do more community engagement. And actually, we came back to all the parties and said, nope, we're going to give you $500,000 to do more planning, more talking, because you do not have a share, even though the harm is there, right? And so that was my second one. It's actually not a real project, but it was actually to be able to say no. And the last one I will tell you is, the one that gets my team, I will say this one is the one that gets my team teary-eyed, is Philadelphia, which was our third most highly funded. Any Philadelphia fans here? Okay, all right, yes, I know, okay, good. So the Vine Street Expressway. And again, we had a lot of great projects from Baltimore to even now Cleveland, the waterfront reconnecting, Rondo, obviously, so many others. But what made this actually special, it was actually reminding us of why we got into government. So on the day we announced the $150 million to Philadelphia to basically put a cap project in Chinatown, there's a picture that we use. If you go on our website, it's still up. It's a picture of Vine Street and the protests of those individuals who were there trying to stop the bulldozers for coming and taking the church and the like. We got an email from this one staff from the White House who did Pacific Islander and Asian affairs. And she said, you can have no idea what your award means to me. And again, we get things like that, but what it was, she was like, my mom was in that photo that we oftentimes see of, this Asian community pushing back. And for her mom to have now kept going and fought, and now her mom is not around, but She then, in 2020, during kind of the racial equity awakening, took on the mantra of talking about like why these communities matter, to then see that actually happen. That's when you realize that these projects are not just a road or a bridge. This is legacy that cuts across generations. And that, to me, is the true power of reconnecting. It's restorative. It's restorative. It's not saying that harm was done, but we're actually restoring that whole that was inherited, that was handed down a generation, that now we actually can create a new North Star, as Calvin said before, that actually says, let's reimagine. And I think that's the power. So that to me sits well for me. Now, the last one I'll just say, and this is the...
Gave you 3, you're taking 4.
Okay. No. All right, I got 4. And this is the one, this is a cautionary tale. Because this is, anyone from Buffalo? Buffalo, New York? So Buffalo, was our largest grant in our first round in FY22 to Kensington Parkway. Again, a very similar story. Buffalo has a great architecture where it was a very much like me. I'm from Southwest Georgia, so Savannah is kind of a good example of like a park system in every neighborhood. Buffalo has a similar, but it was destroyed through the build out of the interstate system. Well, there was a woman there named Stephanie Bauber-Getter. Her family were clearly the residents who experienced this, and her grandparents, who then raised her, were telling her, and she can see it firsthand as a child. As a child, she was a youth advocate, something I can relate to as a young child, having my mother being hit by a drunk driver, being a youth advocate, getting into space. Not like because you wanted to, but because it's like that's the nature of the thing. But then for literally 50 years of her life, advocating for a reconnecting community, a cap. We need a park. We want access across this highway. There's pollution. And she then convinced Governor Hochul to put $1 billion in. Finally, she had the right political alignment of someone in the state who was running at the state level who would say, hey, yeah, I'll take some of my formula dollars, right, and invest it in. And then to have the federal government, gosh, this is a multi-billion-dollar project. We were only putting $55 million in. But what was the cautionary tale is that sometimes it does take decades to solve the problem. But the cautionary tale, and this is the one I think I'll stop here on, is that I remember before we went up to make the announcement, Tops friendly shooting happened. If you guys remember in Buffalo, an individual traveled many, many miles to go to a grocery store that was literally right by this woman's house in the neighborhood and killed 10 victims from that neighborhood. And when the secretary and I we went to that grocery store. And then we basically just like walked to the event and realizing like, what trauma, right, that's happening here. And for us to be able to stand with Stephanie and the community, and they saw this as like a light of hope after going through such tragedy. And it reminds me in this work that when you don't fix, every new thing that happens adds on to it. And it only makes it harder to unpackage. But here's a cautionary tale. If we don't do this right, this work right, Stephanie was on stage and we were excited to give her flowers because she passed away 2 months later. Imagine a life dedicated to get a couple of $1 billion to repair one scar, right? How much longer? How much longer do we have to wait to do it to those 1,500 other communities who have had similar situations?
Well, this is a good segue into the other side of the learning, which is, having been someone who's written a notice of funding opportunity and then only after it's out realize that what was perfectly clear to me was not clear to anybody else. And going through a process and thinking that my logic was sound and what I was looking for, but then once you get the applications, you kind of adjust and you go in a different way. What are the things that you learned? What do you wish you had known as you first kicked off the program? And I view all of these lessons as the starting place as things go forward.
One of the biggest structural barriers that we have when we talk about reimagining a community, even harmed by whether it's an interstate or, because again, we were not just looking at the interstate, but we're all looking at any train station. I grew up in Southwest Georgia, it was a railroad, right? But let's stay on the highway side. structurally, we have one of the greatest barriers to ever reconnecting communities, and it's not the money. Right now, on the transit side of the ledger, if a transit agency realized it bought too much land, we've now, through decades of advocacy, have now made it so that a transit agency can get that surplus land back to maybe to the local government to do affordable housing, right? Right now, besides GSA, the largest holder of U.S. real estate is FHWA. And in their statute, for them to give up real estate, a local community has to pay fair share. And I did not realize that until David Grant has called me, who is another locust member at Pasadena on the I-710 project, where Pasadena was like literally saying like, we have to pay the state to pay FHWA so that an asset that hadn't even been finished, it was an incomplete highway to nowhere that has been depressing our economic state for decades, we now have to pay for you to get this land back to do something with it. Wait, imagine that conversation now with so many communities who are doing planning grants, who are saying, hey, we want to reimagine, rescoping this real estate, this highway. By the way, my secretary said something really good, and I'm going to cut and paste it, and you should too. Roads, bridges, particularly highways, they're not divine. They're not the mountains. They're not like rivers, right? We didn't grow up with them, right? Like it wasn't a geography, right? They're man-made. So we can put them up, we can bring them down. And if a community says, hey, we have something better, but turns out that was one of the structures. So you didn't have state DOTs and FHWA division office not actually being the players that we needed them to be. So that was one hard lesson, and we need to change that. The second hard lesson is the sad reality is that the places that need the help the most and who need these dollars the most need wraparound services. I think about the challenge we had in Oklahoma City. We put dollars in to support the Black Wall Street, Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa. But it was a church. Now, mind you, the program allowed us, like we were getting really excited. We're like, yes, we need to have a program that we can fund community-based organizations directly. Community-based organizations don't build infrastructure. They don't, right? So already they were not necessarily going to be the lead project on construction, so it was like planning grants. But then even on a planning grant, getting the United Church of Christ ready to be a grantee of the federal government. And by the way, a grantee who can't rely on the state because the state had put in a competing application that wanted to go in a different direction. Think about that. And so one of the lessons we learned is like, okay, how do we empower community when the power structures that they may be existing, even if you have an alignment from the federal government or not an alignment from the federal government, right? How do you give them the support when then Congress, a member of Congress, may send you a threatening letter? I want to see how they're spending the money, right? How do you protect them? And I think in many ways we did not realize it, which is one of the reasons why we created the Reconnecting Communities Institute, that we needed a way to provide kind of like this arm of love and support long after we're gone, right? To these community groups. The last thing I'll say, and I think this is one where for the future, right now we have a pipeline of projects, but the way that state DOTs operate with Congress, we have to do a better job of articulating which highways or infrastructure is coming down. Like there needs to be a systematic program around that. And that's not one that lives just at DOT because there's so many other issues that are caught back. And I think that was one of the things that, unfortunately, if we had more time, we could have got to it. But unfortunately, we did not have a lot of time. And I think this is now with this, advent of the reauthorization, we should really think about that. Like, is there an affirmative program to restructure certain highways? And much like CIG, not saying CIG is the greatest program, but actually kind of speaks to here are the things, here are the housing, here's the economic development, and here's the timeline, because that's important too. So those are my three.
Those are great three. There's a whole other line of discussion I wanted to go down, but I don't want to take time away from the second half of the panel. I did want to just add and get a quick response from you about, because we talked offline about the challenge of really building strong community engagement, especially with a community that doesn't trust the local government or the state government, because not only did they build the infrastructure that harmed their community, they're often continuing to build infrastructure that is harming the community with FHWA formula dollars. And just any thoughts you have on what we need to do there as we go forward?
There was a policy, not written, but it was a policy known by everyone in my team and other agencies, our operating agencies. If you had a discretionary grant that went to a Reconnect Communities, I needed to see it before it got signed off on. And that was our way of saying, at least on the discretionary side, we're not going to screw these communities. Like a do no harm policy. Turns out we do not have a do no harm policy at the federal level. And turns out that do no harm policy doesn't actually equate to other agencies who actually got CHIPS money, right? I was on many calls where I'm finding, wait, you're going to put a chips manufacturing outside this community? That's only going to give the state DOT more reason to expand the highway that we were actually trying to maybe take down or repurpose. So there's a do no harm piece. On the community engagement side, and this is the part where I will just say, from the days of STPP, I know Ann Canby is here, to the early days of T4 America, and even now with Smart Growth and you guys, we have to fundamentally change the way we do transportation. We have to democratize this. Because the more and more, I have to say it, too many decisions are being made behind closed doors and do not see the light of day. And until we change that paradigm, I mean, I know you guys say this a lot, we are seeing so many regional ballot initiatives where people can clearly see the projects that will get funded are passing overwhelmingly. But when it comes to a STIP or TIP, when the last time you got asked to vote on it? Right? And so I think in many ways, Bev, is a reminder of like, if we're going to move into the 21st century where, hopefully this is still the mission of SJW, no matter where you live, where you are, right? You can live in a thriving community, right? That's safe and resilient.
Healthy, prosperous, and resilient.
And we're safe and prosperous and resilient. We're going to have to fundamentally change how we do business. And I think that would be my major takeaway because unfortunately, reconnecting is not a program. It's a principle. And that principle should be how government works moving forward.
I love it. All right, let's thank Christopher.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. And I'm going to invite my colleague, Elisa Ramirez, up to talk to two representatives of communities, Council Member Monica Robinson of Harrisonburg, Virginia, and Ramon Cruz, who's with the Hispanic Association of Contractors and Engineers from Philadelphia.
Yeah, if you want to get that mic. Perfect. Yeah, if you want to come on up. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elisa Ramirez. I'm a Policy and Outreach Associate for Transportation for America. I'm excited to have you all to end our last panel for Equity Summit today. I want to introduce again Monica Robinson. She is a council member for Harrisonburg City Council in Virginia. She's been in this office since 2023. She's also the executive director of the Shenandoah Valley Black Heritage Project that was established in 2013 to learn and share the African American history and culture of the Shenandoah Valley. Finally, she has a very large and varied background in civic engagement in boards, which includes, but not limited to, being part of the board of directors for Our Community Place. She's co-chair of the Harrisonburg International Women's Day March, and she's president of Harrisonburg Rockingham NAACP. I also want to introduce Ramon Cruz. Ramon is the director of Quality of Life and Community for ASE in Philadelphia. ASE is a nonprofit community development organization that responds to the need for economic empowerment in their Latino community. The organization has also evolved into a developer of both residential and commercial real estate, as well as an advocate on behalf of neighborhood residents and small businesses in Philadelphia's Latino community. Thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. So Christopher Coes went over, I would say, the more federal level of what the Reconnecting Community Grants is and how it's come to be. But I wanted to bring them on stage because I think you have on the ground perspectives of what it is to reconnect communities and working with these communities. What does it mean? And specifically looking at community engagement and the obstacles and the lessons learned, what it means to reach out to communities. So let's start there. Councilmember, tell us about your community in Harrisonburg and the projects that you're working on.
I live in a wonderful town called Harrisonburg, Virginia. If you heard of James Madison University, that is where I am. I'm about an hour from Charlottesville. I am from what's called the northeast neighborhood of our city, which just means the historically Black area of our city. We pride ourselves in being called the friendly city, and we are friendly, but there comes a point in time where we're all together, but then we become segregated once again. And so our city is wonderful at wanting to do great projects, but we have got to move away from engagement that I refer to as checkbox engagement and start doing engagement that actually is citizen-led engagement. And so did you want me to talk about the project itself?
Yeah, let's hear about it.
Okay, and so what our project is addressing is the harms that were put upon our community as a result of the urban renewal projects in the 1960s. And so what happened was we, again, at that time, our city was focusing on car-centric planning. And so everything was about more parking, and bringing in more dollars to revitalize the downtown area in Harrisonburg. At the time, Harrisonburg's northeast neighborhood, which at one point was known as Newtown. And so we were separate, we were thriving, we were sustainable, and I guess it was just killing folks. And so as we started to spread down into the community, it came to a point where all of a sudden urban renewal was offered, and they decided that our input and our homes were blighted and that we needed to be moved further back up into that northeast section of the community. By doing that and adding that to the car-centric planning, the money that was given, they used to build infrastructure that pretty much created a divide, and it divided our neighborhood from the downtown area. So when you come into Harrisonburg, which is a beautiful place to be, you can tell when you get to the northeast neighborhood. You can definitely see where the beautification stops from downtown. You can definitely see where murals are no longer visible. And so what we've tried to do is to change that. We want to change the narrative, which isn't an easy thing to do. So when people ask me about the project, I said, we're going to change the harms that were put forth with the northeast neighborhood. And most people say, great, infrastructure is going to change. But in Harrisonburg, we have a much bigger problem. Our problem is that trust was lost. And once trust and credibility is lost within a community, it's very hard to say that we can tear down a parking garage and that's going to solve the problem. So our intentions when we first got together was to deal with the infrastructure, and then myself, who is one of the community-based organization, and Karen Thomas, who leads the Northeast Neighborhood Association, we kind of said, whoa, we can't just start changing things and using the money for infrastructure changes. What about the harm that was done to this community? What about the way folks feel? What about the lack of engagement in government processes? What about the lack of our voices throughout the entire city? We need to address that before we can deal with the harms of urban renewal. So that's kind of how our project started.
And that's really difficult whenever it comes to rebuilding that loss in trust, because you're like, okay, let's fix these aspects. And then it's like many people they're cynical, and it's like, no, we need to help. And I want to dive more into that. But Ramon, tell me about your community and ASE and about the RCN grant that you're trying to secure.
So with ASE, we are based in the Fair Hill, West Kensington area. And when I say Kensington, probably everybody knows internationally, Kensington is known for the opiate epidemic, which is very unfortunate, has devastated that community. Our project literally connects 5 communities. It starts in the Fair Hill section through West Kensington, through Harrogate, Port Richmond, and connects to a trail that is already started from South Philadelphia and going through Penn's Landing. So we believe that having these visual anchors, connecting these communities really will help. And this trail, which will be like a wellness trail, which will help the community, not only with visual anchors, but a trail where they can walk, exercise, and help with their wellness. The challenges that we face with this is exactly the Kensington area and the challenges of trust issues with government, city government. City government has really has left a bad taste in the connections between Kensington, Harrogate, Port Richmond, which is in the middle of us where we are in Fair Hill and where we're trying to connect in Port Richmond, right? And a lot of it is community leaders saying that they used Kensington as a containment center. Everything was allowed in Kensington, the lawlessness, and they don't want to be connected to that. So trying to deal with that has really been the main issue in trying to have this connection.
Whenever it comes to trust issues in your communities, where do you see that most? Is it in city council meetings? Do you do canvassing? Where do you hear it? Like, is it vocally? Is it online? Like, where do you hear that feedback?
For me, I think it's visual, one, and we can see that in lack of participation in government processes and lack of participation in meetings and engagement activities that are held. What's so strange about our community in particular is that we have a community within a community within a community. And when I say that, we have our old Northeast Newtown neighborhood that we're dealing with. And then now, around that neighborhood, since things are changing and we're a refugee resettlement center, city, we have another community of folks who may be asylum seekers, who may be immigrants, refugees, and then gentrifiers. And so now, with Black folk always feeling as if they've been displaced or are constantly losing something when the government goes to action, it's very hard for them to assume that the rest of that community is inclusive of us. It's almost like we're scared that you're going to take more from us. And so with the engagement, I see, there it goes. With engagement, I see less people coming out or the same people coming out is one of the things. I see folks who say to me, why go out again? Because this is what we covered last time. And so it's kind of like a visual, because you can just look out there and see who's not there. And then there's also this media thing that happens in our city where they say, well, once again, we have lack of participation in the Northeast neighborhood, which then also adds to that negative storyline, that negative narrative that's out there. Not only is our section of the city the most run down, the most crime infested, the place where it's not safe to be, we're also the place where we don't care enough to be involved. So we need to change the narrative that's out there that says we don't participate. We need to address why we don't participate. And also in doing that, also try to change that focus from negative to, hey, look at the cultural resiliency of this community. Look at all that this community has done to help economically, economics of the city. Like trying to change that narrative. So there's so many different components of why engagement doesn't work for us.
No, absolutely. And just to touch on that, whenever it comes to participation, it's like, are we making it accessible for working parents? Not everyone has the time to go to city council meetings. Not everyone has childcare. Not everyone has just the energy to go to those things. And it's like, what can we do better to outreach these people so they know what's going on, and that way they know what's being heard. What about you? How do you see the trust?
I believe the level of rigidity in the community. It's just, when you come into a community, these community meetings that the city government is having, and you plop all this data, You have to remember meeting people where they're at. People are tired of seeing the constant things that are going on, and you're coming with these numbers, and they're, you see numbers, I see people. And I remember this clearly when I started working. And the thing about me, I live in the Kensington-Harrogate community, right? So I've been there all my life. I worked with the city government. So it was very hard wearing two hats. Working for the government and then coming into my community and trying to let them know, listen, I'm on your side. And they're like, yeah, all right. But the passion that I just wanted to let them know that, listen, I hear your voice. And there was a community member, a leader, community leader, a ward leader that told me, you have the numbers, I have the names. And that was very impactful. And me going back to government and letting them know the numbers are not doing this. We're not going to be able to communicate with numbers. We have to listen. We can't come into a community and run in our agenda. We need to listen to them. We need to have our community leaders run the agenda. What do they want? How can we help? What needs to be done? So it's a huge trust issue. It's continuing, and I think that's one of the biggest things that we see in the resistance of the gentrification that's going on. All right, what are you trying to do now? Who are you trying to push it aside? Instead of saying, all right, what do you need to help to continue to be this homeowner? So that's a lot of the stuff that we see.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I was on one of the tours this morning on the Street Bridge, and we talked about how to rebuild the Anacostia River and what it means to do that within a community. And again, a lot of skepticism, a lot of cynicism, and it takes years to build that trust. It's not just something that gets done with just one council meeting, or it's just okay, well, we brought snacks or whatever, we try to get your input. It takes a lot. And people get mad if it's sometimes people just need to be angry. Scott Kratz brought a great point on the tour this morning that sometimes people just need something to be angry at. It's not the time to finger wag or to say well, we're trying to help you. Sometimes people just need to have their voices heard, and that's sometimes really important to just kind of be listen, I'm on your side. Tell me what your grievances are. And that's just what that looks like, unfortunately. And it takes years to rebuild that trust in communities. I'm sure y'all both know.
And I think that cities, city governments need to understand how we rebuild that trust. And a lot of these things that have been put into place, infrastructure, issues that people don't trust the city government about, is because we have historically governed in inequitable ways. We have to change how we govern. We have to change how we plan. We have to change how we develop cities. It's not up to those people to change what they think about us. It's about us changing how we plan for the city for all. And that's what cities don't want to do. And we have to change that. If we don't change that, we will get over a trust issue, and then we will have another trust issue because we'll go right back to doing the same things that we do. We can build a master plan and do whatever we want to do in the master plan, like I was talking with CHP planning earlier. But what about what the people want? We talk to the people, we check the box, and then we go right back to our master plan, and we do exactly what it says in the master plan. We can't do that anymore. It has to stop.
Right. Absolutely. And coming from your different perspectives as a council member versus an advocate and somebody who also works with council, what is the biggest lesson that you've learned from community engagement? What is a strategy that you think has helped? And also, what does that really mean to work with community engagement? What does that look like to y'all?
You want me to go first?
Yeah.
Okay. What I've learned the most about community engagement, that I have to shut my mouth. That's the biggest problem.
Yeah.
If I'm doing a porch talk and I'm the one talking, why did I knock on the damn door? I'm just listening to myself and I'm filling out a sheet. I have to shut up. I know how I feel about an issue. I know how I want to vote on an issue. I know how I want to attack the issue. But how do the constituents want me to vote on their behalf? And that requires me to shut up. It requires me to open up my mind. let down my filters, let down my guard, and actually listen to what the community is saying to me. They're saying, we've done this. I'm not filling out another survey. I don't want to do a survey. So that tells me that in the evening, I need to take a walk. And in the evening, I can take a walk and I can chat with people and I can say, hey, can you fill out this survey that we're doing for this plan that we're doing for the city? Maybe I can get to them that way. But they trust me, but I have to show them through my position on city council that I'm not only talking with them, but I'm also working just as hard on the other end to get these folks who have governed historically in the same way to change the governing practices. So my reputation is on the line. I think highly of myself. Okay? Just saying. And I'm not going to let anybody mess that up. So if you tell me as a city manager that we are going to change the way we govern, that we're going to plan differently, by God, we better do it, or there's going to be hell on a Tuesday night council meeting. We're not doing that anymore. And so I've learned so much by being on city council and seeing things from the inside out that now my expectation is not, it has to move this fast. I can actually explain to people, this is the process, and this is why it takes so long, and this is what a CIP is. And so I can kind of use my knowledge now to get folks to understand why I'm doing this for them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What about you?
Yeah, and a lot of that, and you hit it right on the nose, it's about listening. Having community listening sessions, but they have to be resident-driven. They have to be resident-driven. One of the biggest things that I do in community engagement is I go to a lot of civic meetings and I talk to the leaders, the community leaders. That's who the community trusts. That's your way in the community. If you're going to come into a community, you have to go with somebody that they trust and build the trust with them. A lot of the things that we do at OUSET, we have this thing called the Livability Academy. It's an 8-week program where we choose 10 to 15 residents, and we teach them how to write a proposal and build a project, a small project within their community, and we find the funding for it. That helps build trust, because now we're investing in your community. Mm-hmm. Now we're not only that, we're investing in you. We're teaching you how to write a proposal. We're teaching you how to look for funding. We're teaching you how to do things. We have to empower our community residents. We have to teach them about city government. We have to teach them about the language that they're trying to use. Because if we don't empower our residents, what happens is they're just not interested. They're just not interested. So what we do, we empower and we feed into our residents. We want our residents to know that we care about them, that we want them to be a huge part of the next generation. And we worry about our youth. Our youth is also a part of our Livability Academy. We try to get a mixture of people in our cohorts. And at the end, when they see the project come into fruition, it's a win-win situation with them. And now they say, wow, they're really caring about us because they're investing in us and also investing in our community.
We only have a couple of minutes left, and I do want to end on a high note. And I know things are kind of maybe bleak or uncertain right now in our country with this administration, but I do want to ask, what do you feel hopeful for within your communities in the next coming years?
What I feel hopeful is, and I am just like on a real high right now, because I feel like we've reached the place where people are listening. So I want to put everything in me into making sure that we don't lose that. So we've completed the Complete Streets Academy, and we're able to reimagine what that corridor looks like that was tore up by urban renewal investment. And so what I'm interested in is putting a lot of effort into buy-in. I want to get community buy-in. I want to get nonprofit buy-in. I want people to participate more. I want people to use the space. And I want people to see we're not doing this because this is a city instigated thing. They could care less probably if we close the street. I mean, they probably like to mess with the traffic a little bit, but they're trusting in us to imagine this street. By God, I don't want them to look back and say, well, why did we do that if nobody's using it? We're right there on the cusp of making a difference, and we're going to make this happen. So I'm so excited about the future for the city, because this not only can be done in the Northeast neighborhood, it can be replicated throughout the city. And who's going to lead that process? We are, because we've been taught by Smart Growth America. They taught us that cities grow by thinking in a smart way. We're going to be able to do that because CH Planning has given us the tools that we can go out. We don't need to call them now. Sorry, we don't need your business anymore. But now, I'm going to get my little dots on that board, and I'm going to put those ideas up, and I can replicate what they did. So when they leave, they've left me with the tools to continue on. And so I'm going to be all over that city. They're going to be like, who gave her some kind of crown? I'm like, it's your turn. So we can really use that. So this has just been a wonderful learning process. And I'm excited about for our city about what this means for other sections in our town.
Absolutely. What about you, Ramon?
I'm very hopeful. We have a mayor now, a new administration, who is really, really boots on the ground, working on beautification, putting a lot of resources into Kensington, trying to change that environment. And she's affordable housing, and we are an anchor in affordable housing. So we're building collaboratives, collectives. So I'm really hopeful in seeing our community. And when I say we're building collaborations and collectives, we're talking about with community residents. And they are part of these collectives and these collaborations. So we are really excited about what this might bring, and hopeful, and really, really hopeful that in the next couple of years, we'll see the growth. Not only when people say growth, not saying gentrification, but growth in generational community, yes, in our residents, and being resident-driven groups that run and have all these resources to really help our communities.
Councilmember Ramon, thank you so much for being here. Thank you all so much as well. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you. And then, yes.
Thank you all so much for your great words. I appreciated especially the idea of reconnecting communities as a principle and not just a program. It's not just one meeting, one project. It's a mindset that we need to bring into our transportation system itself. And I'm excited about the seeds we've planted here in these communities, and I'm looking forward to tomorrow and seeing how we take these next few years and thinking about these projects in the future. Dustin, I think you have a few things to say about what we're doing next.
Yes. First, a very important thing. If you've lost an earring, come see me afterwards. Everybody check. We found an earring.
I didn't.
Look at the check, and you didn't lose it.
Okay. Now, with that said, thank you all so much for a great and energizing day. I think it was, there was a lot of really great discussions here and in the breakout sessions. So thank you all for participating, and bring that energy back tomorrow. We will also thank our sponsors once again. Shout out to AARP, Pacific Gas and Electric, AirUp, Low Income Investment Fund, National Association of Realtors, Uber, Opticos, and Greater Washington. And the party's not stopping here. Okay, yeah, let's clap it up for our, let's clap it up. Yes, thank you. Without you, it would not have been possible to put on this event and bring so many awesome people together.